The strangest thing about being accused of abandoning my granddaughter was that I had spoken to her every single day, or at least I thought I had tried. For 143 consecutive evenings, at exactly 7:15 p.m., I called the same number. Then one Tuesday morning in a mediation office outside Nashville, my 10-year-old granddaughter looked me straight in the eye and asked, "Grandpa, why did you stop calling me?" The room went silent. Vanessa thought she already knew how that meeting would end. What she didn't know was that an old investigator never walks into a room carrying a worn leather briefcase unless he's carrying the truth with him. Before I tell you what happened next, stay with me here. If you're watching today, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy real-life-inspired family dramas with powerful twists and heartfelt moments, consider subscribing. Now let me tell you how a simple phone call became the biggest lie in our family. My name is Ronan Simmons, and at the time all this happened, I was 69 years old. Now before you start picturing some lonely old man sitting in a dark house feeding pigeons and talking to houseplants, let me stop you right there. First, I don't like pigeons. Second, every houseplant I've ever owned has died under circumstances that should probably be investigated. I lived alone in a small brick ranch house just outside Franklin, Tennessee, about 15 minutes south of Nashville. The place sat on a quiet stretch off Lewisburg Pike with a cracked driveway, a front porch swing that squeaked every time the wind hit it, and a garage that contained enough tools to convince people I knew what I was doing. I didn't. I just liked buying tools. My pride and joy was a silver blue 2009 Ford Ranger with 184,000 miles on it. That truck had survived hailstorms, a deer collision, 3 batteries, and one unfortunate incident involving a Walmart shopping cart. The truck and I understood each other. We were both old. We both made strange noises in cold weather, and neither of us appreciated being rushed. 5 years before the story you're hearing now, my son Ethan died in a car accident on Interstate 65. There are some losses you never completely recover from. You adapt, you learn how to carry them, but you never set them down. Ethan was 34. He had my wife's smile and my tendency to believe everyone deserved a second chance. Sometimes a third, occasionally a fourth. That particular trait turned out to be genetic bad judgment. After Ethan died, the center of my world became his daughter Chloe. She was 5 then, 10 when all of this happened, and from the moment she was born, she had wrapped me around her little finger so efficiently that I suspect she practiced beforehand. You know that look kids have when they realize they can get away with almost anything. Chloe mastered it before kindergarten. She had long brown hair, freckles across her nose, and enough curiosity to power a small city. Every question led to another question, then another, then another. One afternoon, she spent 27 straight minutes asking why different birds walked differently. 27 minutes. I timed it. That child could interrogate a federal witness. As she got older, we developed routines. Routines become important after grief. They're like little anchors, something steady, something dependable. Every Saturday morning, I'd pick her up in the Ranger. Every birthday, we'd go to Meridy's Breadbasket in downtown Franklin for cinnamon rolls. Every Christmas, she'd help me put up decorations that somehow always ended up crooked. And every evening at exactly 7:15 p.m., I called her. That call started about a year after Ethan died. The first time happened by accident. I had called around dinner. She didn't answer. Then she called back at 7:15. The next day it happened again. Soon it became our thing. 7:15, every day, no matter what. It didn't matter if she was visiting friends. Didn't matter if she had ballet practice. Didn't matter if I was tired. At 7:15 p.m., my phone rang or hers did. That was the agreement. Most calls lasted 5 minutes. Some lasted 20. A few lasted longer because Chloe had inherited the family gift for talking. One evening, she spent 12 minutes explaining a disagreement involving crayons. Another call focused entirely on whether dogs understood sarcasm. I still don't know the answer to that one. My favorite calls happened after ballet class. Chloe loved ballet. She talked about it constantly. The shoes, the music, the routines, the girls in class, the instructors, everything. I probably knew more about 10-year-old ballet politics than any retired insurance investigator in Tennessee. One Tuesday evening, she called and announced she was going to dance professionally someday. I asked if professional dancers made enough money to support old grandfathers. She said absolutely not. At least she was honest. Those conversations mattered more than I can explain, not because they were important, because they weren't. They were ordinary, and ordinary moments become precious after you've lost enough people. I need you to understand something. I never tried to replace Ethan. I never expected Chloe to fill that hole. That's not how love works. She wasn't a substitute for my son. She was a continuation of him. Sometimes she'd laugh exactly the way he laughed. Sometimes she'd wrinkle her nose when concentrating. Sometimes she'd tell a joke that was so painfully bad I could practically hear Ethan saying it through her. And every time that happened for a few seconds, grief loosened its grip. Not disappeared, just loosened. Those moments are gifts. So when people later asked why I kept calling, why I kept trying, why I refused to give up, the answer was simple. Because those calls weren't just phone calls. They were connections, threads, tiny daily reminders that family still existed beyond loss. At 7:15 every evening, the world felt a little less empty. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs. Funny how hindsight works. It's like finding a trail of breadcrumbs after you've already walked into the forest. At the time, nothing seemed dramatic. Nothing screamed danger. Nothing looked like the beginning of a family war. It was small things, tiny things, the kind of details people ignore. Vanessa would answer instead of Chloe occasionally. She'd say Chloe was busy, or tired, or in the shower, perfectly normal explanations. Then she'd suggest Chloe call back later. Usually she did, so I didn't think much about it. Why would I? Vanessa and I weren't particularly close after Ethan died, but we were civil, friendly even. At least that's what I believed. She worked hard, raised Chloe mostly on her own, paid bills, managed schedules. Life wasn't easy for her, and honestly, I admired that. Maybe more than I said out loud. So when little changes appeared, I explained them away, because that's what reasonable people do. The first missed call happened in early March, then another 2 weeks later, then another. Nothing alarming, just enough to notice, not enough to worry, yet. The last completely normal conversation I had with Chloe happened on a warm Thursday evening in April. She spent 10 minutes telling me about a school project involving Tennessee history. Then she asked if dinosaurs could have survived secretly underground. I told her probably not. She said I lacked imagination. That was the last thing she said before hanging up. I remember because I laughed for 5 minutes afterward. At exactly 7:23 p.m., the call ended. I didn't know it then, but that ordinary little conversation was standing at the edge of a cliff, and everything was about to change. The first time Chloe's call went straight to voicemail, I didn't think much about it. Kids get distracted, phones get misplaced, life happens. I left my usual message. Hey kiddo, it's Grandpa Roe, just calling to see if you survived another day of school. Give me a call when you get a chance. Then I went back to eating a turkey sandwich and watching a baseball game I wasn't particularly interested in. The second missed call happened 6 days later. Again, nothing alarming. The third happened the following week. That's when I started paying attention. Not worrying, just paying attention. There's a difference. When you've spent 30 years investigating insurance fraud, you develop certain habits. Most people think investigators spend their lives chasing criminals through parking garages or dramatically pointing at evidence. Reality is much less exciting. Most of the job involved noticing patterns, small inconsistencies, tiny details that didn't quite fit. The difference between what people said happened and what actually happened. At that point, all I had was a feeling, a tiny itch in the back of my mind. Something wasn't lining up, but I couldn't explain why. One evening I called at 7:15 p.m., straight to voicemail. 3 minutes later I received a text from Vanessa. Chloe's exhausted, long day, she'll call tomorrow. Perfectly reasonable. The next day I called, voicemail. 20 minutes later, ballet practice ran late. She's already asleep. Again, reasonable. A week later, school project, very busy tonight. Then friend's birthday party. Then not feeling well. Each explanation made sense on its own. The problem wasn't any single excuse. The problem was the growing collection of them. You know how a single raindrop doesn't mean much, but eventually you look outside and realize you're standing in the middle of a storm. That's what it felt like. One Saturday morning, I was supposed to pick Chloe up for breakfast. We had been doing that twice a month for years. Nothing fancy. Usually we'd go to Biscuit Love in Franklin. She'd order pancakes, I'd order something healthier, then I'd steal half her pancakes. Grandparent privileges. At 8:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. Vanessa, need to cancel today. Chloe woke up with a headache. I texted back immediately. Poor kid. Tell her grandpa says feel better. No response. Not unusual, still. Something felt off. Around noon, I stopped by Walgreens to pick up allergy medicine. And there, in the seasonal aisle, I ran into Mrs. Peterson, one of Chloe's teachers. Now I wasn't conducting an investigation, not even close. This was pure coincidence. Mrs. Peterson asked how Chloe enjoyed the school field trip. I smiled politely. Then I froze. Field trip? She nodded. The one this morning. This morning. The same morning, Chloe supposedly had a headache bad enough to cancel breakfast. I remember standing there holding a bottle of Claritin while my brain tried to process that information. Maybe Mrs. Peterson was mistaken. Maybe Chloe felt better. Maybe there was a perfectly logical explanation, and there probably was. So I didn't jump to conclusions. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply went home. But the little itch in the back of my mind got stronger. A few days later, I tried calling Chloe again. Voicemail. I left another message, then another, then another. Eventually, I noticed something strange. The voicemails were never acknowledged, not once. If Chloe heard them, she never mentioned them. If she didn't hear them, why not? Stay with me here. This next part matters, because this is where confusion slowly became concern. I started sending occasional texts, simple things. Photos of my neighbor's ridiculous golden retriever. Pictures of tomatoes growing in my garden, jokes that were terrible enough for Chloe to appreciate. Nothing complicated, nothing dramatic. Most received no response. A few received replies from Vanessa, short, polite, cold, like messages written by someone answering a customer service email. The warmth was disappearing, not all at once, just a little at a time, like watching daylight fade. One Thursday evening, I sat on my porch swing around 7:40 p.m. The Tennessee air was warm. Cicadas buzzed in the trees. My phone sat beside me, silent. I kept staring at it anyway. That's the thing nobody tells you about missing someone. It's not always the big moments that hurt. It's the ordinary ones, the absence of something you're used to, the space where a routine used to be. I wasn't angry yet. Mostly, I was confused and worried because Chloe had never been the kind of kid who simply stopped talking to people she loved. That wasn't her, not even close. A few days later, I sent Vanessa a message. Hey, is everything okay? Haven't talked to Chloe much lately, just checking in. Her response came nearly 4 hours later. Everything's fine, she's getting older and busier. Getting older, that phrase bothered me. Not because it was wrong, because it was being used like an explanation. Chloe was 10, not 25. Kids don't suddenly stop loving their grandparents because they turned 10. At least I hoped they didn't. Otherwise, every grandparent in America was in serious trouble. The cancellations continued. A ballet recital, a sleepover, extra homework, a family event, a church activity. One excuse after another, each one believable, each one small, and that was the genius of it. If someone lies badly, you notice. If someone lies carefully, you question yourself. I spent weeks questioning myself. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe grief made me overprotective. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe Chloe really was just busy. I wanted to believe that. I truly did. Because the alternative was painful. The alternative suggested that someone was standing between a grandfather and his granddaughter, and I wasn't ready to believe that yet. Then came Chloe's birthday. That was the day everything shifted. I mailed her present a week early, a ballet-themed jewelry box she'd pointed out months before at a store near Cool Springs Galleria. It cost $68.95. I remember because the price tag was still in my wallet for weeks afterward. Inside, I included a handwritten card. Nothing fancy, just happy birthday, kiddo. Love you to the moon and back. Grandparent. The package tracking showed it was delivered. 3 days later, I sent a text. Did Chloe like her gift? No response. I waited. Sent another message 2 days later. Nothing. Then finally, she's busy. Thanks. That was it. No photo. No thank you from Chloe. No mention of the jewelry box. Nothing. For the first time, I felt something beyond confusion. Pain, sharp and immediate. Because it wasn't about the gift. It never was. It was about not hearing her voice, not knowing if she had even received it, not knowing if she thought I had forgotten her. That thought kept me awake longer than I'd like to admit. I need you to understand something. I still wasn't angry at Vanessa. Not yet. I kept finding excuses for her. Single parent. Financial pressure, stress, work, life. I gave her every benefit of the doubt imaginable. Probably too many, because that's what Ethan would have done, and because part of me still believed there had to be an innocent explanation. Then one night at exactly 7:15 p.m., I called Chloe again, straight to voicemail. I left my message, hung up, stared at the screen, and something inside me finally clicked. Not suspicion, not certainty, just a decision. The old investigator in me wasn't going to guess anymore. If something was wrong, I needed facts, not feelings, evidence, records, proof. So the next morning, I walked into my home office, opened a desk drawer, pulled out a yellow file folder, and wrote 3 words across the front. Chloe, call, log. At the time, I had no idea that simple folder would eventually change everything. The funny thing about old habits is that they never really leave. They just sit quietly in a corner, waiting for somebody to wake them up. For nearly 30 years, I investigated insurance fraud across Tennessee, Kentucky, and northern Alabama. Most people imagine that kind of work involves dramatic confrontations and surprise confessions. It doesn't. Real investigations are usually boring, painfully boring. Hours of paperwork, endless phone records, receipts, dates, timelines. Tiny details that nobody else notices because they're too busy looking for something exciting. The truth rarely arrives wearing a spotlight. Most of the time, it arrives disguised as a spreadsheet. So when I labeled that yellow folder Chloe call log, I wasn't declaring war, I wasn't plotting revenge, I wasn't trying to catch Vanessa in a lie. I was simply doing what experience had taught me to do. I was keeping records. The first page contained nothing more than dates. April 3rd. Called at 7:15 p.m. No answer. Voicemail left. April 4th. Called at 7:15 p.m. No answer. Voicemail left. April 5th. Called at 7:15 p.m. No answer. Text sent afterward. I logged everything. Every call, every voicemail, every text message, every canceled visit, every explanation. Not because I expected to need it, because I had learned long ago that memories change. Records don't, at least not often. My home office wasn't much to look at. A wooden desk, 2 filing cabinets, a bookshelf filled with investigation manuals I hadn't touched in years, and one old HP printer that appeared to be fueled entirely by hatred. That printer becomes important. Trust me. About 2 weeks after I started the folder, I called my best friend, Walter Hayes. Walter and I had known each other since the Reagan administration. He was 72 years old, retired from teaching high school history, and possessed the unique ability to make inappropriate jokes during serious situations. Oddly enough, that made him excellent company. He showed up at my house on a Saturday morning wearing a University of Tennessee baseball cap and carrying a bag of sausage biscuits. No greeting, no hello, just handed me a biscuit and said, "You sounded grumpy on the phone." "I am grumpy. You've been grumpy since 1998. That was fair?" Walter sat down at my kitchen table while I explained everything. The missed calls, the canceled visits, the strange messages, the growing distance. He listened quietly, which was unusual. Walter normally treated silence as a personal enemy. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You think she's keeping Chloe away from you?" I sighed. "I don't know. That's not what I asked." I stared at my coffee. The truth was, I didn't want to answer, because saying something out loud makes it real, and I wasn't ready for that. Finally, I shrugged. "I think something isn't right." Walter nodded. Then he said something I still remember. "Those are two very different statements." He was right. There was a difference between knowing something was wrong and knowing why. At that point, I only had the first one, not the second. For the next month, I continued documenting everything. The folder slowly grew thicker. Phone screenshots, text records, delivery confirmations, notes, dates, times, patterns, nothing dramatic, just information. The kind of information people ignore until it suddenly matters. Then came the birthday gift situation, the jewelry box, the one Chloe never seemed to acknowledge. A week after the package was delivered, I decided to check something. I logged into the shipping website and printed the delivery confirmation. Simple enough, except my printer disagreed. I pressed print. Nothing happened. Pressed again, still nothing. Then the printer emitted a sound that can only be described as mechanical laughter, a grinding noise, a beep, then complete silence. I called Walter. 20 minutes later, he arrived carrying a screwdriver for reasons neither of us understood. "Why do you have a screwdriver?" "I don't know." "Do you think we're repairing it?" "No." "Then why bring it?" He shrugged. It felt optimistic. For nearly an hour, we fought that printer. The printer won. Every time. At one point, Walter threatened to throw it into the Cumberland River. At another point, I seriously considered helping him. Eventually, we got it working. Sort of. The printed page emerged, looking like it had survived a tornado, but it was readable, barely. Walter held it up proudly. "Technology fears me." The printer immediately jammed again. That moment shouldn't have been funny, but it was, and honestly, I needed that laughter. Because underneath all those records and documents, I was hurting. More than I wanted to admit. The hardest part wasn't being ignored. The hardest part was uncertainty. Not knowing what Chloe believed, not knowing what she had been told, not knowing whether she thought I had abandoned her. That possibility haunted me. Some nights I'd sit on my porch after sunset listening to crickets and replaying old conversations in my head, trying to identify the moment everything changed, trying to find the mistake. Mine, Vanessa's, anybody's, because surely there had to be a reason. People don't just wake up one morning and erase family, do they? Then something happened, something small, something that seemed insignificant at first. One Tuesday afternoon, I received a text message from Vanessa. The message began normally. Then it took an unexpected turn. "Chloe's ballet expenses are increasing. Competition fees are expensive. If you'd like to help, that would be appreciated." Now, there was nothing wrong with asking for help. Absolutely nothing. Raising children is expensive. I knew that. Lord knows Ethan had emptied my wallet often enough. But something about the wording caught my attention. Not because it was rude, because it was unusually direct, almost transactional. I replied, "Of course. How much do you need?" The answer arrived within 60 seconds. Exactly 60. Yes, I checked. $824.50. Specific, very specific. Whenever somebody asks for money and includes 50 cents, I immediately become suspicious. I can't explain why. Maybe it's professional trauma. Maybe it's because fraudsters love exact numbers. Either way, my investigator instincts twitched. Still, it was Chloe. If ballet mattered to her, the money mattered to me. So I sent it. Immediately. But I did something else too. Something Vanessa never noticed. In the payment memo, I wrote for Chloe's ballet competition fees. Then I printed the confirmation, added it to the yellow folder. Date, time, amount, purpose, simple, routine, boring, the way evidence usually begins. Over the next several weeks, more requests appeared. Not constant, just enough. A school expense, a medical bill, a camp registration. Each request arrived through text. Each included a precise amount. Each received a payment. And each payment received its own page inside the folder. Walter noticed what I was doing. One afternoon, he looked at the growing stack of documents and raised an eyebrow. "You think you're building a case?" "No." "You sure?" I considered the question, then answered honestly. "I'm building a record." Walter stared at me for several seconds. Then he laughed. "That's investigator language for yes." Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. At the time, I honestly didn't know. What I did know was this. The folder kept growing, the calls kept going unanswered, and for the first time, money had entered the picture. Looking back now, that was the moment the story changed. Because distance hurts. But greed makes people careless, and eventually carelessness leaves evidence. What I didn't realize yet was that Vanessa was about to make a mistake, a very expensive mistake, and she was going to put it in writing. If you've ever lent money to family, you already know the dangerous part isn't the money. It's the story attached to it. Money leaves, stories stay. For most of my life, I had a simple rule. If someone I loved genuinely needed help and I could afford to help, I helped. No contracts, no interest, no lectures. Life is hard enough without turning family into a bank transaction. That philosophy had served me pretty well for 69 years. Unfortunately, it also made me easier to take advantage of. Not because I was naive, because I trusted people I loved. There's a difference. The first payment after the ballet fee request didn't bother me. Neither did the second, or even the third. On paper, everything looked reasonable. Kids are expensive. Anyone who's raised one knows that. 1 month after the ballet payment, Vanessa sent another message. "Chloe needs dental work. Insurance isn't covering all of it." Attached was a number, $1,190. Again with the oddly specific amount. Again with the urgency. Again with the implication that this was for Chloe. I didn't hesitate. I sent the money. But by then my routine had changed. Transfer, screenshot, print, file, date, time, purpose, every single time. The yellow folder was getting thick enough that I had to buy divider tabs. That should have been my first clue that things were heading somewhere strange. Normal grandfathers don't organize family interactions like a legal exhibit. Then again, normal grandfathers don't spend 3 decades investigating fraud claims. A week after the dental payment, I texted Vanessa. "How's Chloe feeling after the procedure?" No response. 2 days later, "Everything okay?" Nothing. 3 days after that. "Tell her Grandpa says hi." Finally a reply. "She's fine. Busy week." That was it. No mention of a dentist. No mention of recovery. No mention of anything. Just busy. Always busy. The word was starting to irritate me. Not because kids can't be busy. Because it had become the universal answer for everything. Like duct tape. Some people use it to fix problems. Others use it to cover them. Around that time, I started noticing another change. The requests were arriving more frequently. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. One Thursday afternoon, school laptop broke. Replacement needed. $735. The following month, summer camp registration deadline. $2,400. A few weeks later, additional ballet travel expenses. Another several $100s. Each request arrived with the same pattern. Urgency. Specific amount. Little room for discussion, and every single request involved Chloe. That's what made it difficult, because every time I considered saying no, I pictured my granddaughter. I pictured the little girl who once spent 20 minutes explaining why jelly beans should be considered vegetables. I pictured ballet recitals, school projects, birthday cakes, the sound of her laugh. And every time I opened my wallet. Looking back, I realized Vanessa understood exactly how that worked, whether consciously or not. She knew Chloe was the one thing I wouldn't risk disappointing. One afternoon, I sat in my kitchen reviewing bank statements, not because I was suspicious, because retirement turns otherwise normal people into amateur accountants. You start checking things: electric bills, insurance payments, random subscriptions you forgot existed. While going through records, I added up the money I'd sent over the previous several months. The number surprised me, not because it was financially devastating. I was comfortable. Ethan had insisted I save aggressively for retirement. For once, he'd been smarter than his father. Still, the total was larger than I expected. Several $1,000s, almost entirely connected to Chloe. Again, that alone wasn't alarming. What bothered me was something else. I couldn't remember hearing Chloe mention any of it. No stories about summer camp, no excitement about a new laptop, no comments about travel competitions. Nothing. Now kids don't report every detail of their lives. I understand that, but Chloe talked about everything. Everything. If a squirrel crossed her path on the way to school, I'd eventually hear about it. If she got a new pencil, there was a reasonable chance I'd receive a full review. So the silence felt strange. I tried convincing myself I was overthinking. Retired investigators are famous for that. Give us enough free time and we'll create mysteries where none exist. At least, that's what Walter claimed. And to be fair, Walter wasn't always wrong. Then summer arrived, and with it came the first crack in Vanessa's story, the summer camp payment. I remember the exact amount, $2,400. I remember because I nearly spilled coffee when I read it. Apparently, this was a specialized academic camp Chloe desperately wanted to attend. Vanessa described it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Educational, enriching, important, all the right words. So I paid. Of course I paid. 3 weeks later, I stopped by a local bookstore in Franklin, Landmark Booksellers, one of Chloe's favorite places. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, mostly killing time. While browsing, I ran into Mrs. Harmon, a woman whose granddaughter attended school with Chloe. We exchanged small talk, weather, retirement, the usual subjects old people discuss when trapped together. Then she casually asked, "Did Chloe enjoy staying in town this summer?" I smiled politely. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Harmon looked confused. She was at the community pool almost every week. My stomach tightened, just slightly. Not enough for panic, enough for attention. Stay with me here. Because this was one of those moments that doesn't feel important until later. Community pool. Every week. The same weeks she supposedly attended a specialized summer camp. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the camp was local. Maybe Mrs. Harmon was mistaken. Maybe. At that point, my life contained an awful lot of maybes. I thanked her, finished browsing, drove home, and sat quietly in my truck for nearly 10 minutes after pulling into my driveway. Not angry, not yet, just thinking. That evening, I opened the yellow folder. For the first time, I wasn't simply recording information. I was comparing it. Request, payment, timeline, claim, date, one column beside another, one fact beside another. The old investigator was becoming difficult to ignore. Then came the second crack, the laptop. A month after paying for the replacement laptop, I finally managed to get a brief phone conversation with Chloe. The first real conversation in weeks. 5 minutes, maybe less, but hearing her voice felt like sunlight after a storm. We talked about school, her friends, a science project. Then she casually mentioned using the same old Chromebook she'd had the previous year. The Chromebook. The supposedly broken laptop. I nearly dropped the phone. Not because I had proof of anything. Because suddenly multiple stories weren't matching. and when enough stories stop matching, patterns emerge. After the call ended, I sat perfectly still, listening to the silence in my living room. The grandfather in me felt hurt. The investigator in me felt awake. Neither feeling was pleasant. That night I added several more pages to the folder, more notes, more dates, more observations. Then I closed it, locked the drawer, and tried to sleep. I failed, because for the first time I was beginning to suspect something I desperately didn't want to believe. Maybe this wasn't misunderstanding. Maybe it wasn't bad communication. Maybe it wasn't stress. Maybe someone was using Chloe's name as leverage. And if that was true, things were about to get much uglier. What I didn't know yet was that the answer wasn't waiting inside a document. It was waiting inside a grocery store, and it was about to come directly from Chloe herself. The grocery store that changed everything wasn't some dramatic location, no thunderstorm, no emotional music, no movie-worthy coincidence. Just a Kroger on Murfreesboro Road on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Funny how life works that way. The moments that divide your life into before and after rarely announce themselves. They're usually hiding between a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk. I was there because I'd run out of coffee. That's it. No deeper meaning. At 69, running out of coffee qualifies as an emergency. I parked my Ranger near the garden center entrance around 3:40 p.m. and headed inside with a shopping list written on the back of an old electric bill. Coffee, bread, chicken soup, bananas, the exciting lifestyle of retired men. I was standing near the produce section comparing 2 bags of apples when I heard a voice. Grandpa Rowe. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. You know how sometimes you hear a familiar voice in a crowded place and your brain fills in the blanks? Then I heard it again, louder. Grandpa Rowe! I turned around, and there she was, Chloe. For a moment, the entire store disappeared. The carts, the people, the fluorescent lights, everything. All I could see was my granddaughter running toward me. She nearly crashed into a display of oranges in the process. Same Chloe, always moving faster than her balance could manage. I barely had time to set down my basket before she threw her arms around me. Now I want you to understand something. I had not hugged that child in nearly 4 months. 4 months. That doesn't sound long until you love someone. Then it feels like forever. The hug lasted maybe 3 seconds, maybe 4, but I felt every missed phone call inside it, every canceled visit, every unanswered message, every lonely evening at 7:15 p.m. Then she stepped back and smiled, and immediately asked the question that changed everything. Why don't you visit me anymore? Just like that. No warning, no hesitation, no idea what those words did to me. I remember staring at her, actually staring, because my brain refused to process what I'd just heard. Why don't I visit you anymore? She nodded, completely sincere, completely confused, like she had been carrying that question for months. I felt my stomach drop, not because I understood everything, because I suddenly understood enough. Stay with me here, because this was the moment the puzzle pieces started locking together, not all of them, just enough to reveal the picture. Before I could answer, Chloe kept talking. Kids do that. They don't realize adults sometimes need a minute. You used to come all the time. Another smile, smaller this time. You stopped calling too. I think my heart physically stopped. Just for a second, maybe 2, stopped calling. That phrase echoed in my head. Stopped calling. The man who had called every night. The man whose phone records could prove it. The man who still had reminders set for 7:15 p.m. Stopped calling. I swallowed hard. Then I did something that took every ounce of self-control I possessed. I didn't tell her the truth. At least not the whole truth. Because Chloe wasn't the problem. She was a child. And children should never be forced to stand in the middle of adult battles, no matter how tempting it is, no matter how justified you feel, no matter how angry you are. I knelt slightly so we were eye level. You miss me, kiddo. She looked offended, actually offended, like I'd asked the dumbest question in human history. Of course I miss you. Then she hugged me again. And that almost broke me, because children don't fake things like that. Adults do. Children usually don't. Not when they're 10, not when they love you, not when they're confused. I glanced around, and that's when I saw Vanessa, standing about 30 feet away near the dairy section, frozen, absolutely frozen. You know that look people get when they suddenly realize something has gone terribly wrong. That look. The look that says this conversation wasn't supposed to happen. Vanessa started walking toward us. Fast. Not running, but close. Her smile appeared a second too late, a little too forced, a little too perfect. Chloe, sweetheart, we need to finish shopping. Chloe rolled her eyes. 10-year-olds have turned eye-rolling into an art form. But I just found Grandpa. Found, not saw, found, like I'd been missing, like I'd disappeared. The word hit harder than she intended. Vanessa finally looked at me. The smile remained, barely. Ronan, Vanessa, a masterclass in uncomfortable politeness. For several seconds, nobody said anything. Then Chloe rescued the conversation again, because children accidentally destroy lies without even trying. Mom said you were busy. I looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at the floor, then the ceiling, then the shopping cart, anywhere except me. Interesting. Very interesting. The investigator in me took notes immediately. The grandfather in me wanted to cry. I settled for neither. Well, I said carefully, sometimes adults get mixed up about things. That was the most diplomatic sentence I've ever spoken. I deserve an award for it. Chloe nodded thoughtfully, apparently satisfied. Vanessa wasn't, not even a little. The conversation became awkward after that. Painfully awkward. The kind where everyone knows something important exists, but nobody wants to say it out loud. Eventually, Vanessa suggested they needed to leave. Immediately, urgently, as though milk products might explode if they stayed another minute. Before leaving, Chloe hugged me one more time. Then she said something I'll never forget. Can you call tonight? Simple question. Simple words. Devastating impact. I smiled. Absolutely, she grinned. 7:15. My throat tightened. 7:15. She waved, then disappeared down the aisle with her mother, and I stood there holding a bag of apples I no longer remembered selecting. For several minutes I didn't move, didn't think, didn't do anything. Just stood there, because everything had changed. Not legally, not publicly, but internally. The uncertainty was gone, the confusion was gone, the benefit of the doubt was gone. Chloe believed I had stopped calling, which meant somebody had told her that, or allowed her to believe it. Either possibility was unacceptable. I finished shopping eventually, I think. Honestly, I don't remember half of it. I drove home, parked in the driveway, sat in the truck, and replayed every second of that conversation, again. By the time 7:15 p.m. arrived, I already knew what was going to happen. Still, hope is stubborn, so I made the call, exactly 7:15, just like always. The phone rang once, then immediately went to voicemail, straight to voicemail. Not after several rings, not after an attempt. Immediately. I stared at the screen, then left my message, the same way I always did. Hey kiddo, Grandpa Roe calling. I hung up, waited, nothing, no return call, no text, nothing. At 8:02 p.m., I received a message from Vanessa. 3 sentences. That was all. Please stop confusing Chloe. She's adjusting to new routines. I'll decide when communication is appropriate. I read it once, then twice, then a third time. And suddenly, every strange moment from the past several months snapped into place. The missed calls, the canceled visits, the unanswered messages, the lies. For months, I had been searching for an innocent explanation. That text killed the last one. I wasn't dealing with misunderstanding anymore. I was dealing with control, and that realization changed everything. Because that night, for the first time since Ethan died, I stopped trying to explain Vanessa's behavior and started preparing for the truth. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was angry. Anger would have been easier. Anger gives you direction. Anger gives you something to push against. What I felt was heavier. I kept hearing Chloe's voice in my head. Why don't you visit me anymore? Then a few minutes later, can you call tonight? And finally, 7:15. 3 simple questions. 3 questions that told me more than 6 months of text messages ever had. She missed me. She wanted contact. She thought I had chosen to disappear. That last part hurt the most. Not because she blamed me, because she believed something that wasn't true, and somebody had helped her believe it. Around midnight, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The yellow folder sat beside me, thicker than ever. I opened it, not because I needed more evidence, because I needed reassurance. Sometimes facts become emotional support. Every call log, every voicemail, every payment, every message. The records told a simple story. I had never stopped trying. No matter what happened later, that mattered. Around 8 o'clock the next morning, my phone rang. Walter. Of course. The man possessed some kind of supernatural ability to sense emotional disasters. How bad is it? He asked immediately. No hello. I know what hello sounds like. You sound worse. Fair point. 20 minutes later, he was sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Again, this time carrying pecan pastries from a bakery near downtown Franklin. Walter believed carbohydrates could solve most problems. Honestly, his success rate was impressive. I told him everything. The Kroger encounter, Chloe's questions, Vanessa's text, the voicemail situation, all of it. He listened quietly. Again, unusual, very unusual. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his arms. Well, I waited. She's lying. Straight to the point, classic Walter. I rubbed my forehead. Probably. Not probably. Definitely. I sighed. Walter grabbed a pastry. You know what your problem is? Besides spending time with you. He ignored that. You're still treating this like a misunderstanding. That sentence landed harder than I expected, because part of me knew he was right. For months, I had been trying to find innocent explanations, trying to preserve peace, trying to avoid conflict, trying to believe everyone wanted the same thing. Maybe because Ethan would have wanted that. Maybe because I was tired. Maybe because acknowledging the truth meant accepting how ugly things had become. Walter pointed toward the yellow folder. How many pages are in there now? I glanced down. Over 100. He nodded slowly. People don't accidentally create 100 pages of evidence. That was difficult to argue with. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Walter asked the question I had been avoiding. What do you want? Not what do you think? Not what's fair, not what's legal. What do you want? The answer came immediately. I want Chloe. He smiled softly. I know. No, I mean I want my granddaughter back. I want our relationship back. There was a difference, a huge one. I wasn't interested in punishing Vanessa. I wasn't interested in revenge. Not yet, anyway. I wanted my granddaughter to know the truth. Walter nodded. Then he said something that changed the course of everything. You need a lawyer. I immediately shook my head. No. Why? Because lawyers meant war. Lawyers meant courtrooms. Lawyers meant turning family pain into legal paperwork. I hated the idea. Walter understood that. Ronan, listen to me. His tone changed. Serious. Rare. When your truck breaks down, you call a mechanic. I didn't answer. When your heart hurts, you call a friend. Still nothing. When somebody starts controlling access to your granddaughter and using that access to manipulate you, he pointed toward the folder, you call somebody who understands family law. I stared out the window. The logic was impossible to ignore. That didn't mean I liked it. You know that feeling when you're standing at the edge of a path you never wanted to walk. That was me. I knew Walter was right. I just hated that he was right. About an hour later, we drove to Puckett's Grocery and Restaurant, because apparently every serious life decision in Tennessee requires biscuits and sweet tea. That's probably a state law. The lunch crowd had already started arriving. Country music played softly overhead. The smell of barbecue drifted through the room. For a few minutes we talked about everything except my situation. Football, weather, retirement, the usual. Eventually Walter looked across the table. "Do you remember Rebecca Collins?" I frowned. The name sounded familiar. Then it clicked. Family attorney. That's the one. Rebecca Collins had handled a custody dispute involving one of Walter's relatives years earlier. According to Walter, she possessed two qualities that made her extremely effective. She was smart, and she didn't tolerate nonsense. Both seemed useful. I hesitated. Walter noticed immediately. "You don't have to sue anybody." "I know." "You don't have to drag Vanessa into court tomorrow." "I know." "You just need information." That part made sense. Information I understood. Information had been my entire career. Evidence, records, facts. The language felt familiar, comfortable. By the end of lunch, Walter had convinced me to schedule a consultation, not because I was ready for legal action, because I needed to understand my options. There is a difference, a very important difference. 3 days later, I found myself driving into Nashville. Traffic on Interstate 65 was behaving exactly the way Nashville traffic always behaves. Terribly. Some things never change. Rebecca Collins' office sat in a professional building near West End Avenue. Nothing flashy. Clean lobby, neutral walls. The kind of place designed to look trustworthy. I carried the yellow folder under my arm, the same folder that had started as a simple call log. The same folder that now felt strangely heavy. Not physically, emotionally. A receptionist led me into a conference room. A few minutes later, Rebecca entered. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, confident posture, the kind of person who notices details immediately. She shook my hand, then glanced at the folder. "That's quite a file." I laughed. "You have no idea." For the next hour, I explained everything. From the missed calls to the Kroger encounter, from the payments to the voicemail messages. Rebecca interrupted occasionally, only to clarify details. Dates, times, names, specifics. When I finished, she sat quietly for several seconds. Then she asked to see the folder. I handed it over. She opened it, turned pages, read messages, reviewed payment records, examined call logs. 5 minutes passed, maybe 6. Then she looked up, and I'll never forget the expression on her face. It wasn't shock, it wasn't sympathy, it was recognition. The look of somebody who suddenly understands exactly what's happening. Rebecca closed the folder carefully, folded her hands, and said 6 words that changed everything. "She thinks you kept nothing." For a moment I just stared at her. Then I looked down at the folder, at the hundreds of pages, at months of records, at every call, every payment, every message, every lie. And for the first time, I realized something important. Vanessa probably believed I was just an old man with a phone. She had no idea who I used to be, no idea what I had spent 3 decades doing, no idea what was sitting inside that yellow folder, and that misunderstanding was about to become the biggest mistake she had ever made. I spent most of my career watching people make the same mistake, over and over and over again. They assumed nobody was paying attention. That's usually how lies survive. Not because they're clever, because people stop looking. Rebecca Collins looked, and after reviewing my yellow folder, she immediately understood something I hadn't fully accepted yet. This wasn't just family tension. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't poor communication. This was a pattern, a documented pattern. The difference matters. A misunderstanding can be solved with a conversation. A pattern requires evidence. Fortunately, evidence was one thing I had, a lot of it. Rebecca spent the next hour organizing my records into categories: calls, texts, payments, voicemails, canceled visits, shipping confirmations. Every page found a home. Watching her work reminded me of old investigations. Facts become more powerful when they're arranged properly. 1,000 puzzle pieces scattered across a floor look meaningless. Put them together and suddenly Everyone sees the picture. At one point, she paused while reading a text exchange. Then she looked up. "When was the last time Chloe called you on her own?" I thought about it. Actually thought. Not guessed. Not estimated. Thought. The answer shocked me. Nearly 5 months. 5 months. The realization hit harder than I expected, because I had been so focused on the blocked calls and canceled visits that I hadn't noticed the absence of something else. Chloe's independent contact had disappeared entirely. Rebecca made a note, then another, then another. Eventually, she closed the folder. "Here's what concerns me." I nodded. "The money?" She shook her head. "Interesting. I had expected the money, the questionable camp, the laptop, the dental expenses. Instead, she pointed toward the communication records. This. The calls, the texts, the voicemail logs. The money is troubling," she continued. "But the isolation is what gets attention." That word stuck with me. Isolation, because that's exactly what it felt like. Somebody had slowly built walls between Chloe and me, one brick at a time, one excuse at a time, one missed call at a time. And somehow I'd watched it happen without fully recognizing it. Not because I was foolish, because I trusted family. Sometimes trust creates blind spots. The following week, Rebecca advised me to continue documenting everything. Nothing aggressive, nothing confrontational, just continue collecting facts. That part was easy. Facts were comfortable. Facts don't yell. Facts don't manipulate. Facts simply exist. For several weeks, life settled into a strange routine. Every evening at 7:15 p.m., I called Chloe. Every evening, the call went straight to voicemail. Every evening, I left a message. And every evening, I documented it. Date, time, duration, voicemail left, repeat, over and over. The repetition became almost surreal, like living inside a loop. One evening, I left a message about a baseball game, the next about tomatoes in my garden, the next about Walter accidentally locking his keys inside his truck. Again, for the 3rd time that year, Walter claimed it was strategic consistency. Nobody believed him. Through all of it, I kept talking to Chloe as though she would hear every message. Maybe she would someday, maybe she wouldn't, but I needed her future self to know I never stopped trying. I need you to understand something. That wasn't strategy, that was love. There's a difference. Then Vanessa made the mistake Rebecca had predicted. Greed made her impatient. Impatience made her careless. Carelessness creates evidence. It started with an email, an actual email, not a text, not a phone call, an email. And as somebody who spent years investigating fraud claims, let me tell you something. People are much more dangerous when they're speaking. People are much more vulnerable when they're writing, because written words don't forget. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line regarding Chloe's expenses: professional, formal, almost businesslike. The message itself was several paragraphs long. Most of it discussed rising costs, school activities, ballet, transportation, food, normal expenses. Then I reached the final section, and that's where everything changed. Vanessa wrote, "Given that you have chosen not to call, visit, or actively participate in Chloe's life, financial support is the least you can do." I read the sentence twice, then 3 times, then 4, not because I misunderstood it, because I understood it perfectly. Chosen not to call. The phrase practically glowed on the screen. Chosen, not able, not unavailable, not absent. Chosen. There it was, in writing. A direct statement, a provably false statement, the kind investigators dream about, not because it was dramatic, because it was measurable. 143 call attempts, hundreds of pages of records, months of voicemail messages, and now a written claim stating I had chosen not to call. Rebecca's phone rang less than 10 minutes later. She answered on the second ring. I forwarded the email immediately. Her response arrived about 15 minutes afterward. Only 7 words. Do not respond. Save everything. That's it. 7 words. But those 7 words told me everything I needed to know. The email mattered a lot. For the first time, Vanessa had stopped implying things. She had committed to a version of events. In writing. The problem reality disagreed. A few days later, another request arrived. More money, another expense, another urgent deadline. I don't even remember the amount anymore. What I remember is how different I felt reading it. Before I felt obligated, concerned, protective. Now I felt observant, detached, not emotionally detached from Chloe. Never that. Detached from the manipulation. The spell was breaking. Slowly, but it was breaking. Around that time, Walter and I met again at Puckett's. Same table, same sweet tea, same pecan pie that probably violated several health regulations. I showed him the email. Halfway through reading it, he started laughing. Not because it was funny, because he couldn't believe someone would put that in writing. Oh, that's bad. That's what Rebecca said. No, I mean bad for her. He handed the phone back. She actually wrote that. She did. Walter shook his head. You spent 30 years documenting fraud. Correct. Does she know that? I don't think so. Another shake of the head, then a smile. Slow, knowing. The kind of smile people wear when they see a train heading toward a broken bridge. She's really underestimated you. Maybe. Or maybe she'd spent so long seeing me as a grieving old man that she'd forgotten who I used to be. That happens. People see age and assume weakness. They see kindness and assume ignorance. They see patience and assume surrender. Sometimes they're wrong, very wrong. Over the next several weeks, Rebecca quietly prepared. No dramatic threats. No emotional confrontations. No angry letters. Just preparation. Facts. Records, documentation, every new email, every text, every blocked call, every payment request, everything went into the file. The yellow folder eventually became 2 folders, then 3. By that point, even I had to laugh. Walter claimed the paperwork weighed more than Chloe. Honestly, he might have been right. Then one Friday afternoon, Rebecca called. Her voice sounded calm, calmer than usual, which immediately made me nervous. Ronan, that's me, we have a mediation date. I froze. The words hung in the air. Mediation. After months of uncertainty, months of records, months of silence, the moment was finally approaching. I glanced toward the filing cabinet, toward the yellow folders, toward the evidence, toward the truth. Everything we'd been building was leading somewhere. Rebecca continued, West End Avenue. 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks, not long. Not nearly long enough, yet somehow too long at the same time. After hanging up, I sat quietly in my living room, listening to the ticking clock above the fireplace. The house felt different. The story felt different. For months, I had been gathering facts. Now those facts were finally going to be tested. And for the first time, I had a feeling Vanessa still didn't understand what was coming. She thought she was walking into a conversation. She had no idea she was walking into a record. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 10 a.m., West End Avenue, Nashville. 3 weeks sounds like a long time until you're waiting for something important. Then it disappears in a blink. Those 21 days passed in a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Part of me wanted the meeting to arrive immediately. Another part wanted to postpone it forever, because once the truth comes out, you can't put it back. And no matter how right you are, family wounds still hurt. The night before mediation, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous about the evidence. The evidence didn't worry me. Facts are comforting. Facts stay where you put them. People are unpredictable, especially people who feel cornered. At 6:30 the next morning, I gave up trying to sleep. Made coffee, burned toast, made more coffee. Then sat quietly at the kitchen table looking at the 3 folders that had grown out of one simple yellow file. 3 folders, months of records, hundreds of pages, thousands of small decisions, every single one leading to this day. At 7:45 a.m., Walter arrived at my house. Uninvited, naturally. The man treated my front door like a public entrance. He walked in carrying 2 breakfast sandwiches and immediately pointed at my coffee mug. "That's your 4th cup." "3rd. "You're lying." "Possibly." He sat down, looked at the folders, then looked at me. "You ready?" I considered the question carefully. "No." "Good." I frowned. "Good." Walter nodded. The people who are completely comfortable walking into family mediation are usually the people causing the problems. That actually made me laugh, which helped a little. By 8:30, we were heading north toward Nashville. Traffic crawled, the sky was gray. The radio played old country songs neither of us paid attention to. At one point, Walter reached over and tapped the top folder. "You know what's funny? Doubtful. You spent 6 months building the world's least exciting superhero origin story." I stared at him. "What does that even mean?" He grinned like old man pickup truck filing cabinet justice. I hated how much that made me laugh. The truth is, humor becomes important during difficult times. Without it, pain consumes too much space. By 9:35 a.m., we pulled into the parking garage attached to the office building. Rebecca was already waiting in the lobby. Professional as always, organized as always, calm as always. I envied that. She greeted us and immediately moved into preparation mode. "Remember," I nodded, "no arguments." Another nod. "No emotional reactions." Nod. "No matter what Vanessa says." That one required effort. Still, I nodded. Rebecca looked satisfied. Then she glanced toward the folders. "Let the documents do the talking." Those 6 words stayed with me all morning. Let the documents do the talking. We took an elevator to the 6th floor. The mediation room was smaller than I expected. Funny, you spend months imagining a moment. Then reality turns out to be a beige conference room with mediocre lighting. The room contained a large table, several chairs, a box of tissues. That last detail felt ominous. Nobody puts tissues in a room because they expect a fun conversation. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes later. The first thing I noticed was how confident she looked. Confident isn't quite the right word. Certain. She carried herself like someone expecting victory, like someone who already knew how the story ended. For a moment I felt a strange sadness, because I realized she genuinely believed her version of events would survive scrutiny. That meant she had been telling herself those stories for a long time, long enough to believe them, or at least pretend to. She barely acknowledged me. A quick nod, nothing more, no greeting, no eye contact, no apology, no discomfort. Interesting. Rebecca noticed too. The mediator entered shortly afterward, a man in his 60s, friendly, professional, the type of person who had probably witnessed every imaginable family dispute. Introductions happened. Ground rules were explained. Everyone agreed to remain respectful, which is legal language for "please don't lose your mind." The discussion began with Vanessa. That surprised me. Then again, maybe it shouldn't have. People who believe they're winning usually volunteer to speak first. For nearly 30 minutes she talked, and talked, and talked. She described herself as overwhelmed, stressed, financially burdened, emotionally exhausted. Some of it was probably true, honestly. Life hadn't been easy for her. I knew that. Losing Ethan had devastated all of us. No reasonable person could deny that. But then the story shifted, gradually, carefully, toward me. According to Vanessa, I had become distant, detached, unreliable, disinterested. She described canceled visits, missed opportunities, lack of involvement. Every accusation landed calmly, smoothly, confidently, as if repetition had transformed them into truth. I sat quietly, listening, watching, taking mental notes, not because I doubted myself, because I wanted to understand how far the story had evolved. At one point she actually said, "Ronan simply stopped making an effort." Stopped making an effort. The phrase hung in the room. Rebecca didn't react. I didn't react. The mediator wrote something down, and Vanessa continued. By the time she finished, the picture she painted was remarkably clear. An aging grandfather slowly withdrawing from his granddaughter's life. A struggling mother left to carry everything alone. A A sad but understandable situation. The problem, it wasn't real still. I said nothing. That surprised Vanessa. I could see it. She expected resistance, expected arguments, expected emotion. Instead, she got silence. The same silence that investigators use when they're waiting for somebody to keep talking. Eventually, the mediator turned toward me. "Mr. Simmons." My turn. I took a breath, then another, not because I was afraid, because I was thinking about Chloe. Always Chloe. Every decision came back to her, every single one. I love my granddaughter. Simple, true, nothing dramatic. I have never stopped loving her. Silence. I have never stopped trying to contact her. More silence. Vanessa shifted slightly in her chair, almost imperceptibly. But I noticed. Old habits. The mediator asked several questions. Rebecca answered some, I answered others. Everything remained calm, professional, controlled. Then shortly before lunch, the mediator introduced something unexpected. Something Rebecca had mentioned as a possibility, but I hadn't fully considered. Chloe would be coming in later that afternoon, briefly, only long enough to discuss her wishes and feelings. Nothing formal, nothing intimidating, but enough for her voice to be heard. The moment those words were spoken, something changed. Not visibly, internally, because suddenly this wasn't about documents anymore. It wasn't about evidence. It wasn't about email records. It was about the little girl at the center of everything. The little girl who believed I had stopped calling. The little girl who still remembered 7:15 p.m. The little girl who had hugged me in a grocery store. And for the first time all day, I felt genuinely nervous. Not about losing, about what Chloe might say, because children tell the truth. Not always the factual truth, but the truth they believe. And whatever Chloe believed had been shaped by months of silence, months of manipulation, months of distance. The afternoon session began shortly after lunch. The mediator reorganized the room slightly. More chairs, less formality, a softer atmosphere. Everyone knew why. Then, at exactly 1:47 p.m., the conference room door opened, and Chloe walked inside. Everything that happened before that moment suddenly felt like preparation, because the real confrontation wasn't between me and Vanessa. It was between the truth and the lie, and neither one could hide much longer. When Chloe walked into that mediation room, every adult immediately became less important. The lawyers, the mediator, the paperwork, the accusations, all of it faded into the background. Because at the center of every argument, every email, every phone record, every painful month stood a 10-year-old girl carrying a confusion she never should have been forced to carry. She wore a light blue cardigan over a ballet t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back into a ponytail. And tucked under one arm was a notebook covered with stickers, the same kind of notebook she'd been decorating since elementary school. For a second, I forgot where we were. I just saw my granddaughter. Chloe spotted me almost immediately. Her face lit up. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just naturally. The way people react when they see someone they genuinely love. That reaction mattered more than any document in my folders. She smiled. I smiled back. And then I saw Vanessa watching the exchange. The confidence she'd carried all morning had faded slightly. Only slightly, but enough. The mediator invited Chloe to sit. His voice was gentle, careful, professional. He explained that nobody was in trouble. Nobody was being punished. He simply wanted to hear how she felt. For several minutes, the conversation stayed simple. School, friends, ballet, favorite subjects. The kind of questions adults ask children when they're trying not to scare them. Chloe answered politely, occasionally glancing toward me, occasionally toward her mother. Then the mediator asked the question that opened the door. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about your family? Simple, open-ended, dangerous. Children often tell the truth when adults leave enough room for it. Chloe thought for a moment, then looked directly at me. and asked the question from the grocery store again. "Grandpa, why did you stop calling me?" The room went silent. Not figuratively, actually silent. No papers moving, no chairs shifting, nothing. I looked at Chloe, then at the mediator, then at Rebecca. Nobody interrupted, nobody rescued the moment, because everyone understood that the truth had arrived. And now it needed space. I took a slow breath. "Chloe," my voice sounded calmer than I felt. "I never stopped calling you." She frowned, not angry, confused, deeply confused. "What do you mean?" I glanced toward Rebecca. She gave a small nod, the kind that says now, the moment we'd been building toward for months. I opened the first folder, not dramatically, just carefully, one page at a time, one fact at a time, because facts don't need theatrics. The mediator leaned forward. Rebecca remained silent. Vanessa suddenly looked very interested in the conference table. Interesting. Very interesting. I pulled out several pages, phone records, call logs, dates, times, simple information. Then I placed them in front of the mediator. Every call I made to Chloe. The mediator reviewed the pages. His expression changed almost immediately, not shock, recognition, the look of somebody seeing evidence instead of accusations. I continued, 143 calls. Silence. Most at exactly 7:15 p.m. More silence. I turned toward Chloe. "You remember 7:15? She nodded instantly. Of course she did. That had been our time, for years. I swallowed, then continued. I kept calling. Her eyes widened slightly. The confusion deepened, because now 2 versions of reality were colliding, and only one could survive. Rebecca opened another folder, voicemail records, message logs, transcripts. The mediator reviewed those too, page after page, month after month, evidence stacked neatly in chronological order. No opinions, no emotions, just facts. Stay with me here, because this was the moment I realized something important. I wasn't exposing Vanessa. Vanessa had exposed herself. All I was doing was removing the cover. The mediator eventually looked toward Vanessa. Did you know these calls were being made? The question hung in the air. Vanessa hesitated just for a second. 1 second can feel very long. Then she answered, I don't remember every call. Bad answer, very bad answer. I knew it immediately. Rebecca knew it immediately. The mediator definitely knew it, because people who don't remember something usually don't spend months insisting the opposite happened. The room became noticeably colder, not physically, emotionally. Rebecca quietly slid another document forward. The email, the one Vanessa should never have written, the one that changed everything. The mediator read it, slowly, carefully, then read it again. His eyes paused on a particular sentence, the same sentence that had caught my attention weeks earlier. You have chosen not to call, visit, or actively participate in Chloe's life. Chosen. That word again. The problem was simple. The call records existed. The voicemail records existed. The messages existed. Reality existed. The email didn't match any of it. Vanessa looked trapped, because for the first time all day, she wasn't arguing against me. She was arguing against documentation. And documentation doesn't get emotional. Documentation doesn't forget. Documentation doesn't panic. At one point, she tried to redirect the conversation toward financial support. Big mistake. Huge mistake. Rebecca immediately introduced payment records. The ballet expenses, the laptop, the camp fees, the dental bills. Every transfer, every memo, every receipt, every date. All organized, all documented. Months of records, months of patience, months of preparation. Suddenly, the room wasn't discussing whether I had supported Chloe. The room was discussing exactly how much support had been provided. The difference mattered. A lot. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Not because it was dramatic, because it was heartbreaking. Chloe looked between us, back and forth, trying to understand, trying to reconcile 2 competing realities. Then she asked quietly, You really called me? I looked directly at her. Every day. The room disappeared again. Just me and my granddaughter, nothing else. Every day. Her voice cracked slightly. I nodded. Every single day. For a moment I thought she might cry. Instead she whispered, "I thought you forgot about me." That sentence hurt more than everything else combined, more than the lies, more than the money, more than the manipulation, because that had been the real damage. Not what Vanessa did to me, what she did to Chloe. The belief that somebody she loved had chosen to leave. I shook my head immediately. "No, kiddo." My voice broke despite my best effort. "No, never." Chloe looked down, then back up. Then something happened that nobody expected, least of all Vanessa. Chloe stood up, walked around the table, and hugged me, right there, in the mediation room, in front of everyone. No speech, no dramatic declaration, just a child seeking the truth. I held her carefully, trying very hard not to fall apart, trying even harder not to make things worse. Over her shoulder I saw Vanessa, and for the first time all day her confidence was completely gone, not replaced by anger, not replaced by arrogance, replaced by realization. She finally understood. The story she had spent months controlling no longer belonged to her. The truth had entered the room, and once the truth sits down at the table, lies don't get many chances to speak. The mediator called for a short recess shortly afterward. Everybody needed one, especially Chloe. As she left the room with a family counselor, she looked back at me, just once, and smiled. A small smile, but a real one, the kind I hadn't seen in months. And in that moment, I knew something important. Winning this room wouldn't give me back the lost months. It wouldn't erase the damage. It wouldn't magically heal Chloe's confusion, but it was a beginning. And after everything we'd been through, a beginning was enough. People like to imagine that truth creates instant happy endings. It doesn't. Truth creates clarity. Clarity is not the same thing. Clarity tells you where the damage is. Then the real work begins. The mediation ended 4 hours after Chloe hugged me, not because anyone suddenly became best friends, not because everybody forgave each other, and certainly not because the past disappeared. It ended because the facts were no longer disputed. The call records existed. The voicemail records existed. The emails existed. The payment history existed. And most importantly, Chloe's own words existed. There wasn't much room left for argument. By the end of the day, several agreements had been reached. Not perfect agreements, real ones. The kind created by imperfect people trying to move forward. I was granted structured visitation immediately. Regular contact, scheduled calls, protected communication, clear guidelines, no more uncertainty. No more disappearing phone calls. No more wondering whether a voicemail would reach its destination. Everything would be documented and monitored initially, not because anyone wanted that, because trust had been damaged. Trust always costs more to rebuild than to destroy. Vanessa agreed to participate in family counseling. That part surprised me, honestly. I expected resistance. I expected another fight. Instead, she looked exhausted. The kind of exhausted that comes from carrying too many lies for too long. I need you to understand something. Vanessa wasn't a monster. That would make the story easier. She wasn't evil. She wasn't cruel in every part of her life. She was a flawed person who made increasingly selfish decisions. After Ethan died, she became afraid. Afraid of losing control, afraid of financial instability, afraid that other people might influence Chloe more than she could. Fear mixed with pride mixed with greed, and eventually those things created something ugly. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it. There's a difference. The first supervised visit happened 2 weeks later, Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Franklin, a small family center with cheerful walls and furniture designed by people who clearly hated adult knees. I arrived 30 minutes early. Of course I did. Old investigators don't show up late. We show up annoyingly early. Walter called while I was sitting in the parking lot. "Nervous? Maybe. You'll be fine." I know. You don't sound like it. I know, he laughed. Then he said something surprisingly thoughtful. Don't spend today trying to recover lost time. I frowned. What does that mean? It means Chloe doesn't need 6 months of love today. Pause. She just needs today. That turned out to be excellent advice. The moment Chloe walked into that room, she launched herself at me like a human missile. I nearly lost my balance. Worth it. Absolutely worth it. For the next 2 hours, we did completely ordinary things. Colored pictures, played card games, talked about school, talked about ballet, talked about a science project involving ecosystems. At one point, she spent 10 minutes explaining why turtles were underrated. Honestly, she made a compelling case. Not once did we discuss mediation. Not once did we discuss lies. Not once did we discuss her mother, because that wasn't what she needed. She needed her grandfather, and for the first time in months, she had him. As the weeks passed, those visits increased, then expanded. Phone calls returned. Eventually, the supervision requirements relaxed. Progress happened slowly, the way healthy things usually happen. One conversation at a time, one visit at a time, one repaired piece at a time. Meanwhile, counseling continued for everyone, including me. That surprised people. Apparently, grandparents aren't expected to attend family counseling. Too bad. I did anyway. Because healing isn't something other people owe you. It's something you participate in. During one counseling session, Chloe asked a question I'll never forget. She looked directly at me and said, "Were you mad at Mom?" The room became very quiet. Every adult waited, carefully, because the answer mattered. A lot. I thought for a moment, then answered honestly. Sometimes. She nodded. Fair answer. Children understand honesty better than most adults. Then she asked, "Do you hate her?" That one hurt. Not because I didn't know the answer, because she needed to ask it. I shook my head. No. The word surprised even me. But it was true. I didn't hate Vanessa. I hated what happened. I hated the choices. I hated the damage. But hatred is heavy, and I was getting too old to carry unnecessary weight. Chloe looked relieved. Then she smiled, and we moved on. Months passed. Life gradually became recognizable again. Not identical. Never identical, but recognizable. One evening in late October, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset. The air had cooled. Leaves drifted across the yard. The Ranger sat in its usual spot. The same truck, the same house, the same porch. Yet somehow everything felt different. Then my phone rang. 7:15 p.m. Exactly. I looked at the screen and smiled because I already knew who it was. Chloe. Of course. I answered immediately. "Hello." "Hi, Grandpa Rowe." Just 4 words. 4 ordinary words. But they carried months of healing inside them. We talked for nearly 20 minutes. School, friends, Halloween costumes, the important subjects. Eventually, she asked if turtles could survive a zombie apocalypse. I told her probably. She seemed pleased. When the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time, thinking, reflecting, grateful. Not because everything had been fixed, because it hadn't. The truth is, some damage remained. Vanessa and I were civil, nothing more. Trust hadn't returned. Maybe it never would. Some wounds leave scars. That's reality. Chloe still carried confusion from those lost months. Counseling helped. Time helped. Love helped. But healing isn't instant, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. Still, the most important relationship survived. Not untouched, but alive. And sometimes that's enough. The yellow folder still sits in my filing cabinet today. 3 folders, actually. I keep them for one reason. Not because I'm bitter, not because I'm waiting for another fight. Because they remind me of something important. The truth doesn't always win quickly. Sometimes it loses for months. Sometimes it gets ignored. Sometimes it sits quietly inside a filing cabinet while lies get all the attention. But if you protect it long enough, the truth eventually gets its turn. And when it does, it rarely needs help. The truth can stand on its own. That's what happened to me. Not revenge, not victory, not triumph. Something better. The truth finally got introduced to the room. If you've stayed with me through this story, I want to leave you with one thought. Never assume silence means someone stopped caring. Sometimes the people who love us most are fighting battles we can't see. Sometimes messages never arrive. Sometimes stories are told about us before we're given a chance to speak. And sometimes the loudest version of events isn't the true one. Protect your relationships. Ask questions before believing assumptions. If someone suddenly disappears from your life, try to learn why before deciding they chose to leave. And if you're the one being misunderstood, don't let bitterness become your identity. Protect the truth. Document what matters. Stay calm, stay patient. The truth may move slowly, but it moves. Most importantly, never make a child carry the weight of an adult conflict. They deserve honesty, stability, and love from every direction possible. Family isn't defined by perfection. It's defined by the people who keep showing up, even when nobody notices, even when nobody answers, even when the call goes to voicemail. If this story meant something to you, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been in a situation like this? We read every single one. And as always, thank you for being a part of this, of